All right, so hi everyone. My name is Brad Su and I'm the Product Marketing Manager at commercetools. Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar. In today's session, Kelly Gage, our Chief Product Officer, will be talking about JAMstack, where he will take you through points like an introduction to what JAMstack is, the benefits that it offers, as well as some examples on how you can use it and more. Feel free to raise any questions you may have at any time during the course of this webinar. You can do this by typing your questions into the box located on the right-hand side in the webinar program's interface. Towards the end of this webinar, there will be a Q&A to answer those questions, so be sure to stick around for that. And we'll also be recording this webinar so you can review it at a later time. With that, I'm going to hand things over to our speaker. And Kelly, over to you.
Thanks, Brad. It's good to be here today. Happy to be talking about JAMstack. I have to admit, I did not know very much about it until probably January, February. And then I had 3 customers say all of a sudden that they were doing it at the same time. And then I started looking into it more and I thought, wow, this is pretty cool actually. And now we've had a few more customers tell us that they want to start doing it as well. So I thought, I'd talk to them and learn their use cases and, learn a little bit more about it. And turns out it's pretty cool stuff. So I want to talk about JAMstack today. As Brad said, we'll do Q&A at the end. And so please do ask questions through the Q&A function. A little bit about me. I started out my career with ATG as an architect, and there I got a very good commerce background. I then went to Oracle as a product manager in their cloud group. And then I've been at commercetools now for almost 4 years. So coming up on 4 years. And at commercetools, I lead product, integrations, and design. So that is me. I do want to provide a little context before we get into this. JAMstack is very, 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 very early in the hype cycle. So, with a hype cycle, you typically have an innovation of some sort. There's a peak of inflated expectations where everyone says that this technology is going to be the next big thing that's going to save the world. Think of cloud, think of big data, think of machine learning. And all of these concepts or these patterns or these things have gone through this. And then everybody realizes that no, big data won't save the world and, cure AIDS and all of those things that it's been touted to do. But then long term, over the course of 5-10 years, depending on the technology, there's this plateau of productivity. So just to put this in context, JAMstack is very, very, very early. It is not yet hyped, or it's not overhyped, I should say. So just be aware of all of this. This is still a very much of an emerging trend. So don't read too much into this yet. Still have a long way to go with JAMstack before this becomes the mass market here. This is the originator of JAMstack. So Netlify was the first big adopter. They created the concept and they've been promoting it. And look, it's in their commercial best interest to do it. We do the same thing with MACH, M-A-C-H, Microservices, API, Cloud, and Headless. They're doing the same thing with JAM, so JavaScript, APIs, and Markup. But Matthias is really the creator of this term, this concept, and here's how he defines it. So this really came about in about 2016. And fundamentally, it's JavaScript, it's APIs, and it's Markup. So that's the JAM. And those are really the only 3 things that you need for successful JAMstack. So the JavaScript is all client side. We'll talk about this more in a minute. But the JavaScript is actually responsible for making calls back, for rendering, of course, but also for making calls back to your APIs. And then you have APIs or GraphQL, but some means of exposing data and functionality back at your origin. And it's important to note that it's not just one origin like it used to be. It's not just one monolithic commerce platform that did everything. Instead, today you have a commerce platform, you have a CMS, you have search, and all of those things expose APIs. So you're calling back only for data that has actually changed. And then finally, you have markup of some sort, right? Markup is something that a browser can read. Typically, that's HTML, and it's pre-rendered. And I think that's the key part there, is that it's pre-rendered markup. And I'll talk about all of these more in a second. So the first is JavaScript, and really it's any one you choose, any one you want. And it's important to note, if you look on the right here, when you're calling APIs, you're typically calling one of two types of APIs. Either you're retrieving some type of data, and here you would have a price that you're retrieving, for example, or the variance, right? In this case, it's sizes. Or you're executing some type of functionality like add to cart, for example, right? So you need some type of framework to do that. You need to be able to retrieve data, and you need to be able to execute functionality. And it runs on the client side, so you're basically bundling up a library that then is downloaded to the client. Again, you can use GraphQL as a complement to REST. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to make API calls. You can make GraphQL calls as well. But we see a lot of React. I think that's kind of the most popular that we're seeing across our install base at commercetools. And then the next is APIs. So what you're doing here is you are, and it's annoying that the M and the A are the way they are. They should actually be reversed because it makes it easier to explain. But with the M, you are statically pre-rendering and pre-generating your entire website, basically, or your app, and you're throwing it to a front end. You're throwing it to a CMS of, or a CDN of some sort, or a cloud. But basically, you're serving statically rendered pages from some type of file storage. The APIs are then used to retrieve data and functionality and execute functionality from your commerce platform or your origin, whatever that happens to be. And I'll get into an example here in a second, but let's go back to this example. In this page, this entire product detail page would be pre-rendered and saved as basically a .html file and served directly from the origin. But prices and availability, whether you can add to shopping cart, those are something that change on a regular basis. That can change by the second. And if you need to reprice your product, you want to do that on the fly. So what you might do is you might grab the pre-rendered version of this, but then make a call back to the origin and get the new price for that product, whatever that happens to be. But the concept is you're actually calling back to the origin only for the very, very small amounts of data that actually need to get updated on the client. It can be GraphQL as well. So remember that GraphQL is a very good complement to REST. And again, most of our customers are doing GraphQL, which is pretty cool. And the APIs are generally backed by microservices. And they might be microservices within a single organization. Like we at commercetools have a bunch of microservices. They could also be microservices as in different vendors. So you could use us and Content Stack, or us and Contentful, or us and Ampliance, or whoever it happens to be for content. And then the same thing for search, and then the same thing for personalization. So the concept is you're making calls back only for data that needs to get changed. And then finally, you need some type of markup. And again, typically it's HTML, but this is the definition of HTML per Wikipedia. It's a hypertext markup language, right? That's what it is. It's markup. And then what you can use is a static site generator, like Gatsby is really popular. And what it does is it basically renders using JavaScript. It renders the entire website, and it saves all of the pages as JavaScript or HTML, right? Whatever format, proprietary format that the static site generator uses. So instead of having a single shopping cart template that you then render with every single HTTP request instead what you do is you use that template, use the static site generator, and you basically create a static copy of that page for every single product in your entire product catalog. You also do the same thing for your homepage and your category pages. So it's all pre-rendered. So for the vast majority of calls, you're not actually making any calls back to your commerce platform or your CMS. You're just strictly serving pages to your customer directly from the edge or from a cloud or whatever that thing happens to be. Once you build your HTML, that typically is pushed to Get through a workflow, and then you can statically you can throw out a new version, deploy a whole new version of your website. You basically throw it in a staged directory in your CDN, and then you give the command to your CDN or cloud or whatever it happens to be, and it'll do a complete switch over from the old version to the new version in one shot. So you're not doing like an incremental phased update of your live website. Instead, you're copying it, you're pushing it from Get directly to the CDN. And then you're doing a binary, like an atomic deployment, basically. You're switching everything over at the exact second. And then the CDN invalidates its caches, and it retrieves the new version, and then it's serving out the new version to all of your customers. But it's these files here. If you look on the right, this is actually the output of Gatsby. These files are what the browser is requesting. And it doesn't even have to be a CDN that you pull from. So you can use, of course, a standard CDN, but you could use GitHub Pages if you wanted. You could use a public cloud of some sort. You could just use plain old EC2 for hosting. You could use storage. So a lot of folks use AWS S3, which is just a file store, and you can serve your pages there. But that's the point, is all you're strictly doing is you are serving static pages to a customer. Like, that's it. And of course, Netlify, I mean, they kind of invented this term. It is a marketing term, but they invented this term, and a lot of folks are using them directly because of their pre-integrated tooling and everything else. So yeah, I mean, it's really whatever you prefer. And just to put it all together, this is roughly what the architecture looks like. So you have a JavaScript framework, right? Something on the client side. You have product catalog content from a platform like us or from your PIM. And then you have other content from your CMS. So think of that as your images, your product copy, your landing pages and how they're laid out. So you have all of those three components. You use a static site generator, something like Gatsby or Next.js, for example, and you basically create a whole, you build out your entire website, and you export it basically as HTML files. I mean, conceptually, that's what it is. And then you throw that into Get, and then you deploy that to whatever you're using for hosting. So again, that could be a CDN, it could be file storage, something like that. And then when the customer is making requests, when they pull up the homepage, they're actually just interacting directly with the CDN only. And only when they get to checkout, for example, where things are really dynamic, are they actually pre-rendering pages, or they're executing pages from the client. So it's a different model, but it's similar to what we're used to. Quick note that JAMstack is not a specific product or a specific architecture per se. It's just a set of principles. And I think fundamentally, if you're synchronously generating on the fly an HTML document in response to an incoming HTTP request, it is not JAMstack. JAMstack is serving a pre-compiled page from somewhere, typically a CDN. And also, I mean, you generally don't use a web server with JAMstack. But generally speaking, that's what it is. You're serving statically generated pages from a site generator, static generator, to your client. That's what you're doing. And a lot of folks would say, well, isn't this just headless? The difference, and the fundamental difference, is your front end pages, your front end is dynamically rendered. So a request comes in from the customer. It is generated. It is received by some type of web server sitting in the front end. And then that calls the back end, and it retrieves the product information. It retrieves the inventory, the pricing, it retrieves all of that from the end customer, from the end endpoint, and then it dynamically generates that HTML, which is then served back to the browser. So that's traditional headless. JAMstack, I think, is a more advanced form of headless, and it's more of an implementation pattern where you are statically generating your entire website or your app, and then you are only calling back for the very small bits of data that change very frequently. So think of something like prices again, or inventory, right? I mean, those are the handful of things that you would want to change. The rest of it, maybe you do once an hour, you execute a build and you retrieve the latest product details and the latest category and the latest landing pages. Maybe you just do that on a once an hour basis, for example. But everything else, the things that have to change really, really quickly, that you can just do asynchronously. So it's a big difference. You're retrieving all of your data in headless with every request versus just these small granular pieces of data with JAMstack. So again, I'd say JAMstack is more of an advanced implementation pattern of headless. But in both of these, your head is still separate from your back end, which is what you want. The number one benefit here is performance. If you look at Akamai, they have 2,000 some odd data centers around the world. And they claim, and I don't know how true this is, but like 98% of all internet users are within 1 millisecond of an Akamai edge server, which is pretty remarkable if you think about it. But all of the clouds offer the same type of functionality. So, whether it's Cloudflare or, Akamai or, take your pick, they all have, into the thousands of data centers. And the advantage of that from a performance standpoint is if you are in, let's take an example here. Let's say you're in Hawaii, right? They have an edge location in Hawaii. And let's say that your origin server is sitting in Europe somewhere. The origin server in Europe is going to push an entirely precompiled version of your website to Hawaii. And if you're sitting in Hawaii, you should primarily only interact with that server in Hawaii. So that's it. So your round trip is from your physical computer to the Akamai edge server in Hawaii, right? So you're less than a millisecond. I mean, the island is so small, right? You're a quarter millisecond from anywhere across the entire state of Hawaii. So that's the real advantage here, is you're not, with every request, you're not going back to the origin for all of your data. Instead, you're just interacting directly with that edge server sitting in wherever you happen to be sitting. The second benefit here is cost. Serving up HTML pages and images from a CDN is ridiculously cheap. So look at CloudFront, for example. Per 10,000, I don't even know what number that is. It's a really small number per 10,000 requests, like 0.7 of a penny. So it's ridiculously cheap to serve all of this functionality out. And if you think about just from a pure cost standpoint, you don't have to make that many requests back to your origin. Your origin is really just for capturing orders, basically. But all of the browse path, right, those thousands or millions of products, all of that is served just directly from the edge to the customer. So it's cheaper. There's no network back and forth. You're just interacting directly with your edge servers. That's it. The third benefit is scalability. I did not know this, but Ronaldo has 220 million followers on Instagram. He is the most followed person on Instagram. There are a lot of celebrities with more than 100 million followers. He is a paid celebrity endorser of Nike, which I've heard also uses JAMstack. And it's because of things like this, right? When he posts to his 220 million followers, go to this website, nike.com/football, even though it should be nike.com/soccer, but whatever. That's driving a lot of traffic very, very quickly. And if you can serve all that traffic directly from the edge, you're good to go. But if you had to scale up your infrastructure, that becomes time consuming. That's harder to do for sure. And again, we can do that because we auto scale very quickly, but there are parts, the entire stack has to auto scale like that. And if you go from post a link to 220 million followers, there could be challenges with something like that. So we have to make sure that you don't have issues. And one of the good ways of doing that is you just serve all of that Nike.com/football traffic directly from the edge. So it's a great way of doing that. I'll give you a couple examples, and then we'll do next steps, and then we'll open it up for questions. So we actually use Gatsby internally. So all of our documentation, docs.commercetools.com, is served this way. And JAMstack actually is much, much better suited for static pages like this. This makes perfect sense because this only changes once a day, basically. And then we just generate a new version and deploy it out. But you can certainly do it with e-commerce and the product catalog and things like that. But this is an example we've been using now for a few months, and it's been working really, really well. We also have Daniel Wellington. They're a customer of ours. They do everything with JAMstack, so take a look at that. It's really fast. It works really well. They haven't had any issues with it at all. Again, it's just more of an advanced implementation pattern of Headless. And then we have the JOG group from Netherlands and from Benelux, and they use genecenter.be from Belgium. So they're going to be rolling this out across all of their properties across all of Europe. But here's another example of one of our customers who's doing it. We have a few more who can't be publicly referenced, but it seems to really be catching on out there. And again, it makes perfect sense just to serve all of this stuff right here. The landing pages, the product detail pages, serve all that stuff just directly from the edge. It costs a lot less money, and it's a lot faster for your end customer. And then to get started with this, of course, you can do your free trial with us. So we offer 60 days free. And there's a great book from Netlify. It's like 110 pages, something like that. And they have a very comprehensive how-to guide. They have a nice section in there about e-commerce. And you can just go grab this book immediately and start using it. So definitely take a look at that. It's much better than what I'm doing here in this webinar. All right, with that, let's open it up to questions. I hope that was a good, quick overview of what JAMstack is and how it's beneficial. At some point, I'd love to have more of our customers publicly highlighted, but right now it's a little, it's a little early yet. So what can I help out with question-wise?
Cool. For those who haven't, who want to ask a question, feel free to type it into the chat box. I'm going to go through the questions that we already have, and we'll get to you once you've posted your question. The first question is, how does this come into play in terms of one-to-one personalization?
Well, remember that the vast majority of stuff is not personalized out there. So let me explain that. The product detail page, which is the vast majority of all page views for a traditional e-commerce website, is not that personalized. What page you show to the customer is personalized. So there you can dynamically render your product recommendations. That can all be done on the fly or traditional headless architecture. But the pages themselves don't change. And that's more what JAMstack addresses, is the static serving of those pages. It's making sure that those pages are all pre-compiled, pre-rendered, pre-everything, and just served directly from the edge. But you can, you can apply whatever algorithms you want to show different products to different customers. But then once they click on the link to actually view the product, then that is what is pre-compiled and pre-served from the user. And look, there's some parts that should not use JAMstack. So for example, all of checkout, right, probably doesn't make a lot of sense to use JAMstack. There are lots of pieces. Think of like product discovery or product recommendations. If stuff is done on the fly, that's probably not worth it. Think of search results. Search results probably not worth it because you don't know every possible query that comes through. But again, if you can dynamically, if you can allow the search engine to paint a page with search results that are custom to the user, when the customer clicks on a link to a product, that is all precompiled and pre-rendered and served directly from the CDN. So that is dynamic, and that is JAMstack. Does that make sense? I feel like I'm kind of rambling.
Well, it does to me. But if you need further information, feel free to keep posting in the chat box while we go over the other things. The next question is, oh, I just got the reply that yes, that was very helpful, Kelly.
Great.
The next question is, how do you handle authentication against the commercetools API in terms of browsers securely?
Well, you only have to deal with that. Well, first, you should only be using JAMstack for public data. So, I mean, there should be nothing secure, there. It's just for the home page and the category pages, the browse pages, the product detail pages. That's primarily what it's for. So there's really nothing there in terms of security. But your static site generator will deal with that, because the static site generator is what's making all of the requests and painting the pages for the very first time. So in there, when you configure the virtual browser, that's where you put in the project information on our side, and that of course will deal with authentication and things like that.
Cool. Another security related question. Would you say JAMstack is a good fit if most of your pages sit behind a login and might be heavily personalized? For instance, like a B2B shop. So I think this question is kind of like a combo of the first two that we went over. Pretty unique.
No, I wouldn't touch it, honestly. If you've got a lot of personalized dynamic content, I wouldn't. This is much more for news sites or documentation sites or the browse path of e-commerce. Right? If you want to make it lightning fast and serve your product detail pages, those are very heavy pages, with 1 millisecond latency, that's where JAMstack comes in. It's not for super personalized B2B use cases.
Is there like an alternative solution to that, or do they just have to stick with what we already have?
I mean, you can get as fancy as you want. You could serve the shell of a page, from the edge, and then, call back using GraphQL and paint it all, but again, it gets complicated. So I would personally let JAMstack mature for a couple of years, and do it for the basic browse stuff, and then worry about the more advanced use cases. But I like where you're thinking.
Well, the next question comes a little under the dynamic content umbrella. So I'll just combine two different questions into one. Can it detect updates to individual products and then regenerate only those pages that need updating? So I guess the other way to phrase this question is, how can I make dynamic content work with the static nature that JAMstack seems to be favoring?
You probably, unless you're selling just a handful of products, you probably don't want to rebuild your entire website with every product data change, because all you'd be doing then is changing you'd be constantly rebuilding it. And cache invalidations are expensive. I mean, the CDNs do charge for that kind of thing. So instead, what I would recommend is that you, on a maybe 15-minute basis, or every hour, or twice a day, or once a day, just execute a job to rebuild everything. And then it'll grab whatever's most current and build it and deploy it. You could get really fancy, and you could build some type of workflow so that an event gets thrown when a product is updated, and then that event will then trigger a rebuild. But again, I think you just end up in a never-ending build loop, and you'd forever be changing it. And one of the principles, I mean, generally speaking, is atomic deployments. So you don't want to just be pushing single HTML pages necessarily. Instead, you want to do the entire thing as one atomic operation.
So from a performance perspective, wouldn't JAMstack be basically the equivalent of having like CMS generated content that's fully pre-crawled and then cached in the CDN?
Yep, that's all it is. Like literally what you're doing when you type in website.com is you are going to your local Edge server, your local Akamai Edge or Netlify Edge or whatever that is. That's probably a millisecond away from you. And you are getting a .html file, you're downloading all that markup, you're downloading the images, and that's it. The vast majority of requests are in the browse path, and they should not result in a call back to commercetools or to your CDN. It should all be pre-compiled, pre-rendered, pre-everything. So from a performance standpoint, it does not get much faster than this. Because again, you're just retrieving something from a millisecond away and rendering it. That's it. You're not generating an HTML document on the fly using some type of dynamic JSP or I don't even know, React, you're not making all those calls back.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think there are certain cases where JAMstack excels at, like the PWAs, the progressive web apps.
Yep.
But there are also areas where it's not the best because there's different compromises depending on what technologies you use.
Yeah, absolutely. PWAs are a great fit. Thanks for calling that out.
The next question is, if you have a large product catalog, would you use Gatsby to pre-render the entire catalog, even if you have hundreds or thousands of updates to that every day? I'm guessing the answer here is no, because it sounds pretty similar to another question. But what do you think, Kelly?
Well, first, I think Gatsby is a pretty good solution in general. It's really emerging as the preeminent site generator out there, which is cool. And again, I wouldn't do it on a event basis. I would just do it like if I were doing it, I'd do it twice a day, and I just go rebuild it twice a day on a set schedule, and then of course have a provision to do it on an emergency basis if something dramatic has to change. But yeah, and I would generate it. But if you have like 100 million products, I don't know if I would do it at that level. That's different.
So would you say that event-driven architecture kind of fits this whole rebuilding and redeploying static pages or for like product changes? Or would you say that static site generator is better, especially when set on a schedule?
Well, you could, like I said, register an event for every time data changes, and then auto-generate only the pages that are touched by that, and then push only those changes to your CDN and invalidate those caches. But that's a lot of work, and I'm sure you can do it today. I'm sure it'll be a lot easier in 2 or 3 years, but given the complexity, I would crawl and walk before I start running marathons like that. Different level.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It looks like we've pretty much gone through the general questions on JAMstack, and we're now entering the more commercetools related questions. The first is commercetools planning on creating a demo store that uses JAMstack?
I'm sure we could. I'm not planning on it directly. I can talk to my colleague who runs our demos and see if he'd be interested in doing it. I don't think it would be that much work. I don't see why not. But again, we're still pretty early in this trend right now. This is all still very new.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you made, Kelly. And even if we did, we're probably looking at what, next quarter? It's already almost Q3 in July.
It'd take a little bit for sure.
Yeah. But what I would personally recommend looking at the newsletter if you receive it. Our marketing and product newsletters usually contain the latest news from us, and when we get to that, you'll be the first to know. The other question is using Next.js alongside Headless CMS to detect changes and partial rebuilds is already a thing, but is commercetools planning to consider such similar capabilities?
I did not know that about Next.js. I'm not terribly familiar with that. I'm more familiar with Gatsby. If it works, go for it. I don't think there's anything that we would have to do on our side to support that. The difference is whether you call our APIs with every single page view, as is common today, or if you're just calling only for this truly dynamic content that changes on a regular, that changes frequently, like inventory and pricing.
Yeah, that makes sense because, again, JAMstack is basically JavaScript API and markup, which unlike GraphQL that requires coverage from the vendor side, I think it's pretty adaptable. Like you can pretty much get that sorted out in your own implementation without having to rely on updates from the software vendor like us.
Yeah. Yeah, there's literally nothing we have to do to support it.
Yeah.
I mean, besides maybe update our demo, but that would be about it.
Cool. It looks like we've gone through the list of pretty good questions that all you guys have here. And it looks like we don't have any more. So with that, I'll just wrap up this webinar with a big thank you for your time and thanks for attending. If you missed anything or if you want to look through the webinar again, we'll be sending out a recording in the next 24 hours or so. So be sure to check your inbox on that. Thanks so much, Kelly, for speaking. It was a wonderful talk, very informative as well. And everyone have a good day.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Cool.